Hello all, thank you for joining us this evening and welcome to our Coexistence in Practice series. Before we start the session, I would like to give you a brief on how we are going to do the session. Our speaker will be presenting for around 45 minutes and it will be followed by a Q&A for 20 minutes. I now request Samira Agnihotri, who is the director of the consortium, to introduce our speaker for the evening. Samira, good.
Thanks, Anjali, and hello to everyone who's joined us today. And I'm really delighted to introduce the speaker today, someone who's been a mentor to many of us for many, many years. I'm audible, right? Yes. Professor Anindya Sinha has been known to us as Rana, and he's been at the National Institute of Advanced Studies and the Transdisciplinary University in Bangalore with us. But he's also associated with 9 other institutions in India and the UK as an adjunct research and teaching faculty. He has earlier studied molecular biochemistry of yeast for his doctorate at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai, and subsequently the social biology of wasps, classical genetics of human disease, and social cognition in bonnet macaques at the Center for Ecological Sciences in the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore and the National Center for Biological Sciences. His principal research over the last 3 decades, however, has been on the behavioral ecology, cognitive ethology, population and behavioral genetics, evolutionary biology, and conservation studies of primates and other non-human species. His current research in natural philosophies, urban ecologies, art heritage, and performance studies involves ethno-ethnographic explorations of non-human synergization, human non-human coexistence, and the lived experiences of non-humans, promising insights into other than human life worlds of the past, today, and in the future. Finally, he's deeply interested in the popularization of biology, and in addition to establishing a master's degree program in wildlife biology and conservation in Bangalore in 2001, and working closely with the International Biology Olympiad for over 2 decades now, he has lectured and taught extensively in a variety of educational and research institutes, both across and outside the country. And today he's going to talk to us about changing ecologies, transforming lives, the complex human macaque life worlds in the Indian Anthropocene. And to save time, I'm going to request Rana to please begin today's webinar. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Samira. Thank you for this invitation to deliver this talk. And thank you, Anjali, for all your help and support in organizing this. India, I think, is a very unique country. And one of the major reasons why we are unique is because over centuries, we've lived in very, very close association with other than human species. This relationship has been very intimate, and in today's talk, I'm going to highlight a bit about how these relationships and interactions take on certain forms, which I think really make it worthwhile for us to understand, and especially in today's world when environments are in danger, humans and other than humans are coming in close contact with each other, often not with very positive interactions. And so perhaps it is time to step back and really try and understand the nature of our relationship with other species. One of the important reasons why I think we've had these intimate relationships with other than human species is partly because of a philosophy that has pervaded much of Indian thinking from classical times. And this is that all species are in a continuum. Whether human or whether non-human or other than human, we are all in a continuum. Now, this is very Darwinian in thinking, but remember that these were promulgated centuries before Darwin came up with his ideas, right? And the other reason why I think other than humans have played such an important role in our lives is because of religion. Most of our religious beliefs have incorporated other than humans into them, into our thinking, our actions so intimately that there is an automatic sense of reverence that seems to have evolved over time for other species, other than human species. So today I will talk a bit about macaques, which is the group of primates that I have been studying, or they've been studying me for many, many decades now, for more than 3 decades. And I want to talk about how we have been influencing their lives and they have been influencing our lives, and how we have been co-evolving together. And again, I would like to here insist that we need to really take stock of our relationships now, because it is changing very, very rapidly in these days. Now, I'm sure all of us are aware of how green our country has always been. But much of these natural forests, natural environments are changing very, very drastically. And part of this is, of course, because of our population pressures, but even more than numbers of people, I think it's about the aspirations of people, which is leading to widespread degradation of the environment. And one of the important factors that seems to be driving these changes is, of course, the spread of agriculture, spread of industry, so that much of these natural forests are becoming little islands. And within these islands, every other species has to survive. It will be even more difficult in the future for these species to survive. And I think, therefore, we again need to perhaps take stock of the situation. Now, this pond, and this is a drone picture, is of a small pond called Kanakui. And this is in Anand in Gujarat. And the reason I'm showing this, and I'm starting my talk with this, is because around Kanakui, we suddenly discovered a new species which has never existed there before. And this is the otter, right? And this otter came into this area perhaps for the first time in the history of otters in this region. And they were seeing humans perhaps for the first time, and humans were perhaps seeing them also for the first time. This became an important issue because the otters, in trying to find their own homes, often ended up inside the homes of people, sometimes under the cupboard, as you can see here. And this has led to a tremendous amount of wonder on one hand, but conflict on the other, simply because we don't know how to deal with the otters, and the otters don't know how to deal with us, right? And this is not a new story. We are now seeing an explosion of other than human species populations across urban habitats. And the reason why this is happening, I must admit, is primarily due to our urbanization, which is taking over so much of the natural environments that many of these species really have nowhere else to go. Right? Now, let's look at Delhi. And I've just given this as an example. I'm sure all of us have seen this in our own cities, wherever we live, whether in North India, South India, Northeast India, Western India, wherever we may be. And there is a whole range of non-human species that live with us in these cities and who are constantly adapting to us, just as we are to them as well, to the extent that Jennifer Walsh, an anthropologist, has called many of these urban centers the zoopolis, because it's also the city of animals, right? But having said that, what we often miss out on is this intimacy that develops between sometimes individual humans and individual other than human species. Now, here is a picture of Mahendra Bhai. Mahendra Bhai is from Charotar in central Gujarat, and who he's looking at very philosophically is Raju, a crocodile who lives in one of the ponds. And the reason, again, I'm pointing this out is because not only is there a 300-year history of intimate friendship, in a manner of speaking, between the crocodiles of Charotar and the human communities who share this land with them, but this has also given rise to individual relationships where Mahendra Bhai is not afraid of Raju. he will, in fact, if you ask him to go and touch Raju, and there is a sense of belonging that seems to have pervaded all these human communities because of their shared histories with these crocodile populations. We have also tried to identify with many of these other than human species over time. We have tried to be like them. We have tried to understand them, try to speak their languages. We've tried to behave like them. And often we see this at an extremely developed level with the macaques. Now, the macaques, which many of you are familiar with, I'm sure, is an old world primate genus, which has more than 22 species now, with about 10 species in India. Now, the reason why the macaques are interesting is because they have the largest geographical range amongst all non-human primates. And along with this, there is a remarkable adaptability that these species seem to exhibit, not only in terms of their societies, but also in terms of their individual behavioral repertoires, leading to a tremendous amount of evolutionary success. In fact, the macaques are second amongst all primate species in their distribution, global distribution, second only to humans. And as you can see from these pictures, they have evolved and radiated out into different kinds of habitats. And today we see macaques in India, not only in the rainforests or deciduous forests, but also in the scrub jungles. And I will argue that there is no single human habitation in India which does not have its own population of macaques, whichever species that may be. Now, of these, there are 3 species, and I'm showing pictures of 2 of them here, the rhesus macaque and the bonnet macaque, which we have called the anthropophilic macaques. And the reason why we call them the anthropophilic macaques is because they have a remarkable ability to adapt to almost any kind of environment, of course, natural, but anthropogenic as well. As I was saying, that wherever there are people in India, there are macaques. More than that, what a tendency that we tend to see in the rhesus macaque, the bonnet macaque, and in the long-tailed macaque, which is the third of the anthropophilic groups that we have here, species that we have here, is this tendency to actually move towards human habitation. And though this may sound superfluous, but it is true that if a bonnet macaque is given a choice between staying in the forest or coming out to a human habitation, she will choose the latter. Now, whether this is an innate genetic trait in these species, or whether they have been culturally or environmentally modified into learning to live with humans, is something perhaps later generations of researchers would be able to find. But the point is that given this tendency, there is an intense love-hate relationship that seems to have developed between macaques, wherever they exist, and humans, wherever they share the land with macaques across the Indian subcontinent. Now, this sharing of land is not new, right? And so let me just quickly show you a poem here where the poet celebrates the presence of the macaques. And he says, when the monkey on the bough of the jackfruit tree in the town's commons mistakes for fruit the eye on the thronged drumheads hung up there by mendicant bards, he taps on it. And the sound rouses the male swans below to answering song. It's a beautiful poem. It evokes communication between 2 other than human species, the macaque and the swans. But remember that this is mediated by a 3rd species, humans, who in this form of poets or singers have hung their drums on the tree. The poet of this very evocative poem is a Tamil poet called Muttamochiyar. And what is remarkable is that he wrote this poem 2000 years ago during the Tamil Sangam period. And that just tells you that for 2000 years or more, these macaques have lived with people. So we are as much a part of the natural environment of these macaques as the forests have been. And I think this has really allowed us to become intimately close to macaques in so many ways, and yet we still know so little about them. What becomes tragic is, of course, that when these macaques become dependent on us for their foods, it leads to great deal of precarity. And the reason why I'm showing this picture is that this is not in a city. This is actually, unfortunately, in the Bandipur National Park. So even within our so-called protected areas, the influx of people, mainly in the form of tourists, has led to drastic changes in the lifestyles, in the behavioral profiles, in the social organization of many of these species. And much of our work over the past 20 to 30 years has dealt with what we have called the synerbization of nature. And the point I want to make here is that every time a non-human interacts with a human, or participates in human activity, or interacts with a human artifact, we have changed her life forever. And synerbization has begun. So whether it's a radio collar that we put on an elephant, or a watchtower that we build in, or even sometimes an artificial tank that we build perhaps for wildlife, or we throw out a banana or a slice of bread to a macaque, we have changed their lives forever. And I think this is something that we often don't recognize. We, in the name of science, we carry out what we think are unobtrusive, non-invasive ways of studying animals, but no contact is ever non-invasive, right? Whether with a human or whether with a human artifact. Now, I'm going to summarize about 2 decades of work in this one slide, because what we are now seeing is that the coming of tourists into forests such as the Bandipur National Park and the provisioning of these macaques has led to very serious changes in their biology, in their ways of life, right? The first thing that happens when you throw out a banana or a loaf of bread to a macaque is that there is intense competition between females within troops. Why am I talking of female macaques here? Because they are what are called philopatric, which means female macaques live their entire lives, or so we thought, in the natal troop where they are born, whereas the male macaques keep moving. And therefore, the females have a lot at stake when they live in a particular area. This is where they will live, where they will find their food, find their shelter from predators, bring up their young, and a lot depends on them knowing the environment. And once this kind of intense competition builds up between the females, we've started seeing a new strategy that these females have adopted. They start breaking up, and females start moving out of these troops. And this is the first time that this has been reported virtually in bonnet macaques, entirely driven by humans. And this leads to small groups of females who are then reproductively controlled by a single male. And hence, from a typical multi-male, multi-female organization, we are moving into a uni-male, multi-female social organization. This is a remarkable change in the social organization of macaques within a period of maybe 10 to 20 years. Again, let me insist, brought about just by people feeding these individuals. Now, there are, of course, very biologically interesting phenomena that we see here. For example, individual females have also started emigrating out, and this could be in response to the fact that in a uni-male social organization where there's only one male, she has very limited mate choice. And therefore, she leaves the group and goes and joins a multi-male, multi-female group because she has a larger choice of males to mate with. Again, who are these single males who take up these small groups of females? Are these innately aggressive, strong males who we are now practicing artificial selection on and letting them actually control these small groups of females? Or is this a cultural tradition that individuals learn from others how it's possible to control a small group of females? Now, again, we don't have the answer yet. I'm not sure we will ever get this answer because there's a lot of confounding factors which come into it. But I just wanted to make this one point that when you think you're doing the monkeys a bit of good by giving them a slice of bread or a banana, please don't. because you're changing their lives forever, and it's not necessarily for the good, as I will tell you towards the end of this talk. Now, what we also don't seem to remember is that these macaques have very, very complex sociality, right? And the primary level where this complexity of primate social relationships, and when I say primate, it includes us as well, humans as well. The first level of complexity comes from the level of society, because we now have complex groups of individuals of different age, sex, rank, relatedness, who live together in these groups, but within them, you have subgroups or temporary alliances or even long-term friendships that can cut across these categories. It's exactly as we see in humans that we see in macaques as well, right? And this, therefore, over space and time has great ramifications for the macaques. Over space, each individual, whether they are moving or they are in the natal group, finds itself in a complex network of associations and interactions where there are many alternative strategies for survival and reproduction. Why am I talking about survival and reproduction? Primarily because that is the root sort of driving forces of evolution, right? Over time, we go through this. We live with our parents in our initial years, and then perhaps live with a community of friends in our educational institutions, and then have a family of our own. And then perhaps at a later stage, heaven forbid, you may be forced to live with your children, your adult children. But whatever be it, what we realize is that every individual primate can live in these long-lived social groups where they may need to follow very different strategies at every stage. So the point I'm trying to make here again is that primate sociality is so complex that each individual finds it perhaps a challenge to live in these complex associations. But the more important reason why we have this complexity is because it comes from the level of individual. And because each individual has a very rich body of communicative behaviors, which facilitate her individual expression and allows her to develop complex social relationships. And the reason why I'm ending this slide by talking about individual is because this is something that zoological thinking has always neglected: individuality. And here are 5 male bonnet macaques from Bandipur, from 5 of our groups. And you can easily recognize them, right? You easily recognize them because they have very different hairstyles, they have very different facial features, but believe me, they are each is also unique in the kind of social strategies they have, in the life history, pathways that they follow. And of the more than 2,000 individual macaques that we now know in Bandipur, no two macaques are identical. They're just like us. And this is something that we have neglected for so long, and we really need to get back, because we are not giving the individual her fair share by not recognizing them as individuals. If you've seen one monkey, you've not seen any other monkey. You've only seen that one monkey. Now, there are very 2 important behavioral features that I just wanted to briefly talk about, because this is what is fascinating for us. And that's something, again, that we have neglected. And the first is what we call phenotypic flexibility in social behavior. Now, for a long time, zoologists have believed, and even today, many zoologists believe, that all the changes, all the differences that we see in behavior, in decision-making by animals, is entirely of a genetic nature. It's evolutionary, leads to changes in genotype or genes constitutions. But what we are now discovering is that there's a tremendous amount of what is called phenotypic flexibility in social behavior. And this phenotypic flexibility is basically when one individual in her lifetime can follow a number of different strategies depending on the kind of ecological and social environments that she lives in. These are often reversible changes, and therefore it's exactly like us. In a certain kind of a social association, you have a certain behavioral profile, and you change that when you go into another association. But when you come back to the first, you again take on the same behavioral characteristics that you had followed earlier and that you know works in that particular organization. And so here, I'm again very quickly summarizing what we are seeing in Bandipur over these long years. The unpredictability in food abundance and distribution, largely driven by humans, of course, has led to group fission with female emigration. Smaller group sizes of females are now being formed. But on the other hand, within a group, and I've not had time to talk about this, there's a tremendous amount of flexibility in female social strategies, which is dependent on their dominance rank. So depending on whether a group of bonnet macaques is feeding on its natural vegetation, or whether they are feeding on food given by tourists returning from Ooty to Mysore through the Bandipur and Mudumalai wildlife sanctuaries, her strategies change over the day, depending on what are the levels of competition she's facing. Similarly, there's a flexibility in male behavioral and emigration strategies in groups with varying number of females. And as I pointed out earlier, even in small groups of females, females have now shown a flexibility in their emigration strategies, with them leaving single male groups and joining multi-male groups. And again, the point again I'm trying to make is that what we had never realized earlier is that as ecologies change, as feeding regimes change, as individuals find themselves in a very different, sometimes hostile social environment, they also have the capacity within them to adopt novel behavioral strategies, social strategies that will allow them to perhaps bring down tension, allows them to get an adequate food and survive under these difficult circumstances. They don't have to depend on genetic change. They have innate behavioral complexity that allows them this freedom to be able to adapt to different circumstances. The other point that I wanted to make was about individual behavioral traits and how they set up social traditions. This is culture. I'm wearing a yellow kurta, and I may be wearing a pajama, or I may be wearing a trouser with my yellow kurta. And this is a cultural tradition that I have, and other people may emulate me, other people may decide not to wear kurtas anymore, but all of these are a part of our culture and traditions that we set up, that we maintain, and sometimes these traditions go away as well. And we see this in the macaques as well. So these are therefore, so what are traditions? These are individual behavioral traits which are produced either by accident, human environment, primate environment interactions, or by individual learning by watching others. And this gives rise through social learning to certain kinds of cultures. Now, this results in individuality. I wear a kurta and someone else may wear a sari, or someone else may wear a shirt. And this is a part of our individuality, which again is stemming from our cultural traditions. And this leads to increase in behavioral variation within groups. But we also see certain kinds of patterns, and I don't have time to discuss this in detail, within these social traditions. So we have what are called rapid spread, parent offspring, and stable group specific patterns. A rapid spread is when I start wearing a kurta, and if from tomorrow all of you start wearing yellow kurtas, then that is a rapid spread socially learned tradition. We have parent offspring cultures, which go from parent to offspring, and we have stable group specific patterns. So for example, chimpanzees in Congo, on one bank of the river Congo, put in sticks into termite mounds, pull out these sticks, and they have termites on them, and they run them through their mouth, collecting the termites. The same species population on the other side of the river Congo puts in the sticks, allows the termites to bite onto the stick, pulls it out, and then with the other hand, they remove the termites and put it into their mouth. So here are two stable group-specific patterns where two populations which have never met each other have evolved different cultural traditions, right? Now, whether there is a genetic basis to this or whether these are truly cultural patterns needs to be investigated, of course, but it's remarkable the kind of changes that we see across isolated populations of non-human primates, which parallel or is similar to at least what humans have, if not in complexity, but at least in kind. Right now, so what over the years we have done is we have documented a very large number of such cultural changes. And again, I don't have time to talk about this, but I will just show you very quickly one of these, which is a rapid spread pattern, the washing of mangoes. And so here is a video where what had happened was a few years ago, 5 brothers, male bonnet macaques, left their group and came down to the river Moyar. This is in the Mudumalai Wildlife Sanctuary. And of these 5 brothers, 2 of them developed this very interesting habit where they would pick up a mango, which is a wild mango, which has come floating down the river and is perhaps covered with slime, is also perhaps may not be fully ripe, may be a bit astringent in taste. And both these brothers developed a habit of washing these mangoes before they ate them. And this is what you see. And I'll give you a bit of a commentary as you see them. So here is a macaque with a mango, and he washes it. And now you'll see while washing, he picks up something from the mango after this with his left hand and washes his hand to remove that in the water. So he's using water as a tool. Yeah. He picks up something with his left hand and washes his hand in the water, comes back to the mango, bites into it, keeps it under his foot, and he's lost it. Now he doesn't know where it is. I don't know why he forgot where it is, but he's now looking for the mango, and he clearly has a very good cognitive idea of what the mango looks like, what it feels like. So he's not picking up a stone from under the river water. He is looking for a mango. And when he finds the mango, of course, he washes it again, right? And the reason why we think that this may be culture is because both these brothers showed it. We've seen other individuals in other groups also wash, if not mangoes, other kinds of leaves which have mud or dirt sticking onto them. We've seen elephants in Periyar. Typically, elephants often hit grass that they're collecting against their legs to remove the soil. But in Periyar, we've seen elephants not doing that, but coming down to the water edge, washing the grass in the water before consuming it. And this we haven't seen in too many places. So there are these very innovative behaviors which are evolved by certain individuals within their lifetimes, and it spreads across individuals through social learning. Right. Now, let me quickly now come to the cities, because that's also where we see a tremendous amount of interactions between macaques and people. And again, the zoopolis of Delhi, many of you who come from Delhi know about the macaques of the rhesus macaques of Delhi, which are posing so many problems of a different kind. And again, I'm sorry, I don't have time to talk about the complexity of the relationship between people and macaques in Delhi and the ways in which we have tried to control them, treating them often like furniture, forgetting that they are individuals in their own right, just as we are, and they have as much right to the city as we have, because as a farmer in Udalguri, where Shayan and I have been working on farmer-elephant relationships, as the farmer said, the land belonged to the elephants before we came here. And I think this is true for the macaques as well. And again, that is something we tend to forget. And this has led to different kinds of complexities. Now, again, I don't have time to talk in detail about this, but most of these macaque populations in cities have become a part of what we call the metabolic flows, right? Food, waste, whether of human origin or of macaque origin, seems to circulate. And all these populations participate in these pathways exactly as we do. And we are now integrated in some sense together. There are also economic flows. Now, here, for example, in the lower right, you have a young man, Manish, who sells bananas in Delhi. And his source of income are these bananas, which are bought by people going past, either in cars or scooters or what have you. But they buy the bananas not for themselves. They buy them for the macaques. And so what Manish does every morning is he fills a little water hole, which is just behind him, with water, so that the macaques in the hot summers of Delhi continue to stay there because they have water there. And the people who come stop there because of the monkeys to buy bananas from Manish and feed it to them. So here is an economic sort of an economic flow that takes place, and it has integrated humans and macaques together. And there are many such interesting examples, which I don't have time to talk about, but it's not just Manish who's adapting to the presence of macaques. The macaques are adapting to our presence as well. And of course, many of us have experienced the remarkable ability of many of these individuals to very quickly adapt to difficult anthropogenic circumstances and survive very well. However, this co-living, this sharing of space and resources is not without its hazards. The macaques, the rhesus macaques of Delhi, for example, have become extremely used to human source foods. And this, of course, has not been good for them. We now see in a study in Delhi, we now see that the rhesus macaques of Delhi suffer from hypercholesteremia, obesity, diabetes, all the lifestyle diseases that we have in these urban environments. The macaques have them too. Here is another interesting narrative of how macaques have adapted to a certain situation and how we, as other than macaques, have also adapted to this. Now, here is, many of you may have seen this. This is a barter system that seems to have evolved in many places across South Asia, but definitely in Jaku Temple in Shimla. And here is a little narrative with a commentary in Hindi.
ये टारगेट लॉक करके चला है, टारगेट सामने है और आपको दिखाता हूं। ये पूरी प्लानिंग के साथ काम करते हैं यहाँ पे, फुल प्लानिंग अटैक के लिए जाते हुए। ये मूव किया है, टारगेट ये है इनका और ये देखिए मूव किया है और अभी एक्शन के लिए तैयार है। और ये आपको दिखा रहा हूं मैं, रेडी टू एक्शन, रेडी टू एक्शन एंड अटैक, अटैक। और ये चश्मा लेके ये देखिए जबरदस्त ये अटैक, ये चश्मा जा चुका है और अब 20 रुपए, इसको 20 रुपए का प्रसाद खिलाया जाएगा तो ये चश्मा वापस करेगा। एक जबरदस्त। अब ये देखिए, ये अपने जो इनकी सेफ पॉइंट है उन पे जाके बैठते हैं और अभी आपको पूरी वीडियो दिखाता हूँ। ये देखना जी, ये 20 रुपए का इसको प्रसाद दिया जा रहा है, ये देखो। और ये चश्मा गिरा दिया इसने, ये चश्मा वापस मिल गया। ये जाखू मंदिर में जो मंकी है, ये इनका प्रोफेशन है, एक शानदार एक्सपर्ट मंकी है, एक जबरदस्त। हमारा भी एक्सपीरियंस।
Right. So what is remarkable is that both macaques and humans have learned how to involve themselves in a barter system which will ensure that what they have lost will come back to them. What is remarkable are the shopkeepers who exploit the situation very well. And they will first find out what the monkeys have taken. And if it's just a handkerchief or a newspaper, they'll say, 10 rupiya ka prasad lijiye. Just buy prasad for 10 rupees, they'll return it. But if they've taken a mobile or your glasses, then of course you need 20 rupees. You can't give them a low-ranking prasad and hope to get back your possession. So clearly, therefore, we are talking about very, very complex interactions, relationships, cognitively based understandings of how to handle these relationships. And the macaques have become so integrated into our lives that it's almost impossible to now consider our lives without them in many parts of the country. But this has given rise to what we call ecologies of concern, because this is not a stable, happy relationship. There are several fallouts of these kind of interactions and relationships, and we are spending quite a bit of time trying to understand them, because we also ultimately need to manage these relationships, also perhaps look at conservation of the species. Now, in the everyday, we have now interviewed a number of people whose lives have actually benefited in very, very amazing ways by interacting with macaques. We met, for example, two individuals who independently came back from the verge of taking their own lives simply because they have developed this love for macaques, of feeding them, and they feel that their lives are worth it simply because of the macaques in their lives. And it's remarkable. So we call these micro spaces of health. In some sense, therefore, there are mental health concerns which are being addressed by these interactions with macaques independently of our medical profession. And I think these are, again, narratives that remain to be told. On the other hand, we have bureaucracy, we have bureaucratic measures, whether it's for the aesthetics of the city that we remove stray animals, or whether the mayor of Delhi has an accident and dies because he's trying to ward off a macaque on his terrace. There are clearly difficulties that both the macaques and the humans face when they live with each other. There are also public health concerns. So we need perhaps ways in which we can control these macaques, their populations, their behaviors. And these again become extremely complex processes, not only because of our own thinking of trying how to control these, but because the macaques themselves are responding in their own unique ways to foil and put us at a disadvantage when we think we have a way of perhaps controlling their numbers. There is also an issue of macaque welfare, and many of us are now very concerned about the kind of behavioral actions that we are taking against the macaques, which lead perhaps to the loss of their well-being. And here I want to differentiate between welfare, which is what humans think is good for other than humans, versus well-being, which is what the other than humans themselves would like to achieve for their own sense of well-being. And I think these are two very, very different themes, and we confuse one for the other, which we shouldn't, I think, in the days to come. Right. And now I want to, in the last part of my talk, Anjali and Samira, just give me 5 minutes, please. I'll just quickly finish this. In Bandipur National Park, a few years ago, we discovered a remarkable phenomenon. And let me just show you this. This is basically, okay, let me just tell you what it is. It's the evolution of a new multimodal communication system where macaques have started communicating with humans in a very multimodal fashion using a new kind of a call, which we call the coo call, and a behavior, which is called the hand extension, where when a macaque meets a human being with food, she extends her hand towards the food. Now, this is entirely new multimodal system of communication. And what is remarkable is that the macaques use it only for people holding food, never for other macaques, because simply there is no food sharing between macaques, right? So you may not be able to see this. It's not a very good video, but you can hear the faint coo call. And then she puts up her hand. She puts up her hand, and that is the hand extension. And we have now done experiments to show that the macaques only do it when people have food. And here is one of the experiments. Oh, I'm sorry. And here is one of the experiments we have done. Sorry. That's the coo call. And that's the hand extension. Right. Now, so I think what we are calling these food requesting by bonnet macaques is an emotional relationship that they are developing with people. Interestingly, only juvenile macaques have started showing this behavior. The adults have much more efficient strategies of either snatching food from people or by threatening them, where people become afraid and give them the food. But the juveniles can do neither. So they seem to have evolved this new strategy where they actually have started communicating. And this is what we've shown, and I don't have time to discuss this. It's an intentional behavior. It's most probably a behavior which is called indexical, where they're indicating the food by stretching out their hands. And what we find is that this whole multimodal communication system adapts one vocal signal, the coo call, with 3 visual signals. The hand extension, which I talked about, body orientation. So the macaque is always orienting herself with regard to the food source, and she monitors continuously the actions, the gaze of the food source, so that she is able to finally acquire the food from this individual. And this hand extension gesture, as I said, is intentional. We've shown that. It's possibly referential visual signal. And if it is so, it's the first instance that has been documented of such an intentional referential signal in monkeys. They've been shown in apes and humans, but never in monkeys. So it just tells you how much of complexity these species have, but which we have not discovered yet. These are displayed by certain juvenile macaques as an alternative behavioral strategy, which is different from those of adult individuals, and remarkably, it's interspecies in nature. It's only directed towards humans, and this has now established itself as a distinct behavioral tradition in one of the groups in the Bandipur population that we've been studying for more than 2 decades now. Right. And this is the reason why we call it intentionality. And the reason why I have this slide, and don't worry too much about it, I'll quickly summarize it, is because cognition, or the workings of the mind of a species with whom we cannot communicate. I do not know what is in the macaque's mind as I know what is in yours, because I can ask you and you can tell me. But now there are behavioral monitors which we can use to try and understand what the macaque's mind is doing, what the macaque's mind is telling her to do behaviorally, so that she is able to optimize a particular strategy. So what we now see for this food requesting gesture and call is that it's a social signal directed to particular individuals, right? Only those who carry food. And so it's modified by certain factors. The macaque is sensitive to the attentional state of the audience. If the individual with the food does not look at the macaque, she does not put out her hand. She'll call, and when the individual looks at the macaque, she will immediately put out her hand. She manipulates the attentional state of the audience by actually giving the coo calls. She monitors the response of the audience, and she persists in this until the goal is met. She will keep doing this, but once she gets the food, she will stop and she will move away. So which tells you that it is intentional. There was a particular intention she has, and once that intention is met, she decides to pull off the signal, right? So let me end by just summarizing what I have said. And there are certain important implications that I would like to really convey to you in this. What is it like to be a macaque, right? And I think it's important to note that human interactions, and including a very simple act of feeding monkeys, can have very, very profound, often negative effects on their lives, and at 2 organizational levels, that of their society and that of the individuals. But the macaques are also remarkable in exhibiting great flexibility, not only in their social organization, but in their behavioral strategies, long-term life history strategies, as well as by establishing cultures, behavioral traditions, all of which allow them to successfully adapt not only to the land that they share with other species, mainly humans, but also to individual humans themselves. They know exactly what they want. Now, there's a remarkable story, and I have to tell you this story, of a man called Raghavendra who sells bananas in the Bandipur camp. Now, of course, there are macaques trying to steal his bananas, and he has this thick stick with which to ward off the macaques. However, one alpha male in Camp 2, the same group that we were talking about, Small, became remarkably friendly with Raghavendra. And this was a non-verbal friendship. What Small would do is he would come quietly and sit next to Raghavendra, not looking at him. Raghavendra doesn't look at him. They don't touch each other. But Raghavendra recognizes that Small doesn't take away bananas forcefully from him. So he offers Small a banana. Small takes the banana, doesn't acknowledge the gift, and goes away. A couple of hours later, he comes back and he sits next to Raghavendra quietly till Raghavendra offers him a banana again. And this friendship, again, non-communicative friendship, just by mutual understanding of each other's intentions, continued day after day after day, till till Small was deposed from his group. He left the area, and Raghavendra very sadly would tell us that he didn't find his friend anymore. So that just tells you that it's not just about the population or the species. It's also about remarkable individuals who have learned to adapt to each other, who have learned in some sense to exploit each other. But some of this exploitation is very pleasurable because it's a form of friendship that we have now gone into with other species as well. However, please remember that there has been a remarkable dwindling and disappearance of macaque groups across their distribution range, and this has been documented by Professor Mewa Singh, who's one of my mentors, as well as our group, as well as other groups, who have shown that primarily human-driven factors seem to be leading to the loss of these macaque populations. And so if you think the rhesus macaque and bonnet macaque is always here to stay, they are not. These are possibly endangered species of tomorrow, and therefore we need much more detailed ecological and behavioral studies of wild, rural, urban macaques to not only explore their anthropogenic adaptations and life history strategies, but also how we are destroying their lives in very, very subtle ways sometimes. We therefore also need effective management strategies for these species, not only in protected areas. The bonnet macaques of Bandipur are not safe. The forest department periodically takes them away, which they are not supposed to do. There are accidents where macaques die at the wheels of cars, and a whole range of other kinds of interactions which offer very little hope for the macaques in the future. Let me end the talk by thanking a large number of people who I shall not mention here, but whose names are here. These are only some of them, and all of whom have come together to learn about the macaques, and a variety of organizations who have supported us, not only by giving us permits, but sometimes by taking away those permits, which has actually opened up new vistas for us. Again, I have to end with a poem. However much I may give a lecture for an hour, poets, I think, express the conditions so well, the conditions that I want to talk about. And I want to quote, this is my last slide, Anjali, just give me another 2 minutes. This is from Wisława Szymborska, a Polish Nobel laureate, and I'm a great admirer of her poetry. She was also remarkable in perhaps having the smallest body of work for which a Nobel Prize was given in literature. And she, in the Dahlem Museum of Berlin, she saw this picture once, painted by Peter Bruegel the Elder. It's a 16th century painting, which shows Delft in the Netherlands, a very prosperous town, and you can see that there's a lot of prosperity in the air, and of course it earned its prosperity by exploiting other continents, and the Dutch had already established their colonies in Africa and in Asia, but here were two African monkeys, guenons actually, which were chained to the wall. And this is what Szymborska, on seeing this painting, writes: "This is what I see in my dreams about final exams. Two monkeys chained to the floor sit on the windowsill. The sky behind them flutters. The sea is taking its bath. The exam is history of mankind. I stammer and hedge. One monkey stares and listens with mocking disdain. The other seems to be dreaming away. But when it's clear, I don't know what to say. He prompts me with a gentle clinking of his chain." Thank you.
so much, Rana, for a fascinating talk. But
Thank
since
you.
we're short on time, I'm going to quickly jump to questions.
Sure.
We have a question by Ravi in the chat. He asks, is it then correct for us to understand that all the pervasive impacts of climate change ensures that almost all populations of all species right across the planet are thinophiles?
Absolutely. I mean, there is no two ways about it. And what I wanted to tell you is that it's not just increasing temperature affects, of course, the ecologies, the lives of all these species, but the increase in temperatures also leads to other kinds of changes in our own lifestyles, which in turn will have its own impacts on other species as well. So there are direct changes and indirect changes, and this seems to be almost inevitable at this point of time. Do you want me to stop sharing the screen? Would that help, Anjali?
It's fine with me, Rana.
Okay.
But,
Then let Vislava's poem remain.
yeah. Yeah, we have a question by Vinay.
Sure.
You said that thank you, Ranaji, for amazing talk. You said that if given a choice, some species of macaques would choose to move towards human habitation.
Right.
In case of an optimistic future, where many of the now degraded landscapes are restored, would the macaques still choose to live in human habitation? Would the fission of the groups will reverse?
Yes. Thank you very much, Vinay, for that wonderful question. And the reason why I'm very excited to answer this is because we've recently seen something that has given us hope. So what happened during COVID and soon after that is in Bandipur, the Karnataka Forest Department decided to move its safari base, which was originally inside the tourist camp, to outside the park. So now in the village called Melkamanahalli is where all the tourist buses and the safari buses leave. And so now the collection of tourists and their food stalls and all the paraphernalia that comes with it has now moved out of the park. And what is remarkable is that in a recent visit that we had to Bandipur, what we saw was that because the macaques don't find the people there in their usual places anymore, they have started moving back into the forests. They are now going back to their natural food resources. What we also see is that although there was a lot of traffic between Mysore and Ooty, because the macaques are not by the roadside anymore, people are not stopping, they are not offering food. And that, I think, is remarkable for the macaques. I think they are now reversing. Whether their social organization will now stop converting from a multi-male, multi-female to a uni-male, multi-female society remains to be seen in the future, because these are long-term studies that we need to do. But yes, changes can be reversed. And that gives us hope that perhaps if we follow certain very basic rules, such as not feeding wild animals, I think we would do them a world of good.
But there are a lot of appreciation for the talk, which I'm going to
That's
just
fine.
share.
That's fine. It's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have a question by Vidya. Are
Sure.
there macaque populations that exist away from human interactions at all?
Yes. So there are, but they are very, very rare. So it's interesting. If you look at some of the what are called the broadleaf forest macaques, which could be, for example, a stump-tailed macaque, the pigtailed macaques, these typically tend to still remain away from humans. Whereas the bonnet, the rhesus macaque, the long-tailed macaques tend to, as I said, gravitate towards people. Now, what is, I think, very fascinating is that, as I mentioned earlier, it may still be possible for these species to reverse their ecological tendencies, if I may use this phrase, over time, if we are able to change our own behaviors. But it's also true that as forests become more and more fragmented, recently in Tinsukia, in Assam, Ishika Ramakrishna, who is again, we are working together, and what we recently saw was that the pigtailed macaques are actually now coming out of the forests. They may start foraging in agricultural fields. So we don't really know whether they also will start emerging out. But given their adaptability, it is not impossible for perhaps all these species to adapt to people. And hence, if we want to still see macaques in their so-called natural environments, and again, I would like, this is a debatable subject, because are humans a part of the natural ecology of rhesus and bonnet macaques? Maybe they are. Maybe they've evolved over thousands of years in this way. But for those populations or of those species which don't typically interact with humans, we might still see them in their natural forests, but it's perhaps just a matter of time before they lose their habitats, they lose their homes, and we start seeing interactions with them as well. After all, now leopards, elephants are all just at the edge of our cities, right? And they come in whenever they get an opportunity. And we would have never imagined this 50 years ago, but it has come to pass.
A question by Kimaya, and I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Many times macaques raid crops, damage houses in search of food due to scarcity. Do you think there's a solution to this? And if so, what?
Do I think what? Sorry?
The macaques raid the crops and damage
Yeah.
houses in search
Yeah.
of food due to scarcity. And do you think there's a solution to this? And if so, what?
No, I don't think there is a solution in that sense. The future, let me just say this, that the future lies in coexistence. I don't think there is any alternative but for us to live together. We've lived with mosquitoes and cockroaches. We've lived with other human communities, and I think we will have to live with the macaques as well. However, there are certain simple rules that can be followed, right? Put wire netting on your windows. Make sure doors are closed. Once macaques recognize that there is no food available in a particular area, they tend to lose interest in that area, unless they're getting shelter from some other factors. Therefore, or when you're crossing a macaque group, don't look at them, right? Don't give them food. That's the last thing you should do. So if macaques recognize you or your home or your garden as a non-source of food, they will go away. So I think there are certain very simple behavioral practices that we can adopt. But having said that, I think we will have to learn to live with them, just as they have learned how to live with us. And one small point here, I think, this may seem like a trivial point, but when we say they raid crops or they attack us, I think these are very value-laden words. And I think we should therefore recognize that perhaps we should use more value-neutral terms in the sense that, yes, again, to use a cliche, we have taken away their lands. We have taken away their resources. So when they come to claim some of that land, I don't think we should look at them as raiding or begging. I think in some sense, they are claiming something that they think they deserve to claim. So it's a fine philosophical line there, but I think it's important for us to develop this respect for other species and try and understand their motivations of why they are there, instead of just looking at it more superficially as conflict. I think it's much, much more subtle than that. Thanks.
Then a question by Satya. Microspecies could be positive interaction with the people and the animals, like macaques and elephants in temples. What is your take on it? Should this go ahead or stop?
Okay. My own philosophy of work, as many of my friends and colleagues know, is that I'm very, very afraid of unburdening my value judgments and my value systems onto other individuals, whether human or other than human. I lay this claim that I've never done conservation simply because I don't know what conservation is, what are the values that are being imposed in conservation, and whether therefore we are playing one against the other when we do conservation. Having said that, again, if we come down to the level of individuals, I think not every individual, not every elephant in a Kerala temple is necessarily unhappy. Again, not every individual is happy, right? And that's why I brought in this idea of welfare versus well-being. Yes, we do take up welfare practices, which become very apparent to us, because when we take up these practices, perhaps these individuals, other than humans, don't suffer. and we know, therefore, at least suffer physiologically, or to whatever extent we can decipher behaviorally, and therefore they become important steps. On the other hand, there's also a sense of, as I said, well-being. So an elephant, which was born as a calf in captivity, has lived all her life with a mahout, may not necessarily be an unhappy individual, may not necessarily be a tortured soul, right? And there are 2 points here. One, again, I would make a plea that we look at individual case studies, we look at individual case histories. No two individuals are the same. Their histories are not the same. Their experiences have never been the same, right? Their cultural traditions that they are subjected to, either from the human perspective or the elephant perspective, are the same. So we definitely need to understand them as individuals. The other point, of course, is how do we know what is good for them, right? They cannot tell us. So we need to be perhaps much, much more nuanced in trying to understand how they're responding to a particular situation, what are their physiological, behavioral, psychological parameters that we need to monitor very, very subtly, and then perhaps decide what may be good or not so good for that particular individual. So again, I will neither say that, so some of my friends, long ago, when I had just come into Bangalore and I had started working on the macaques, some of my friends said, let's just break down the primate research center of ISC and release the macaques. And I told them, don't do that, because none of them will survive in the wild, right? They have lived all their lives. And I know that perhaps when we look at them from outside, these are not the ideal lives a macaque should live. But having experienced what they have experienced from birth, it becomes a very, very difficult decision as to what is really going to be good for it in the long term, in the future. And so I think we need to be very judicious, very nuanced, and perhaps put in a lot of hard work and empathy in trying to understand how the other than human individuals are responding to particular situations. Sorry, long answer.
Yeah, the next question is by Vidya. She asked, are we in the midst of another domestication event?
Okay, so that's a good question. I don't think so. Because, there is a lot of debate about what domestication actually means. And so I don't think an elephant, which is in captivity, is really a domestic animal anymore. So I think it is never a domestic animal, right? And I think the mahout is the first person who recognizes this, because mahouts will always tell you that it's really a power relation, right? I have to have control over the elephant, because if the elephant has control over me, it could mean my death. And that tells you that you can't always predict what an animal will do. This is true, of course, of dogs and cats as well. But, we interact with them with so much more intimacy. We do know that dogs and cats have been kept in captivity under very similar conditions for centuries. We have actually practiced artificial selection on them. But when we talk of, let's say, cheetahs in captivity, or elephants, or falcons, I'm not really very sure these are still domestic species. Yes, they are under captivity. They are being forced to live under certain conditions. But have they really, as individuals, adapted to these? They have learned how to live a life without perhaps being too much in pain or suffering. But I'm not sure that if you look at them in the collective, they are really domestic. So I would say that we are not really in another phase of domestication, because what is more likely to happen is that these species will slowly disappear, even before we have a chance of living with them, getting them to adapt to us, and we adapting to them, which might mean in some cases certain processes akin to domestication. I think they will go. They will go much before any of these changes happen in their lives.
We have a comment by Ravi. There are troops of bonnet macaque in the upper reaches of KMTR, which has very limited to no interaction with humans.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm skipping the other comments. Okay, Madhusudan has a question. How in your view must we make the case for averting cultural extinctions of traditions, cultures, behaviors, when species conservation is itself an uphill task charts for rhesus, bonnet, or long-tailed macaques?
Yeah, so I think this is again a very difficult question because there's an academic side of it and there's a pragmatic side of it. When a Serengeti lioness climbs a tree, which she is perhaps the only lioness in that population, and that population is the only population of lions which actually climb trees, and it's remarkable, and we find it very, very interesting. And we want to preserve it, right? And we've talked about this, but that may not always be the case, right? So if there are certain cultural traditions that macaques have perhaps now evolved, which lead to losses on our side, or for example, elephants. Now we have male elephants forming groups. This is the work of Nishant Srinivasaya and some of his colleagues, where we see that these male elephants come together into crop fields. And they have also developed behavioral strategies. For example, during the day, when the farmer is out guarding their field, the elephants are in the water where nobody can touch them. They're just in the water, they're sleeping, they're playing, they're just resting there. And as soon as sunlight fails, night falls, and the farmers make their tired ways home, the elephants emerge and they move through fields or the entire night, feeding on crops and then moving on into the next water body that they find as dawn breaks. This is a remarkable behavioral tradition. It is a cultural tradition because young male elephants are learning from the dominant bulls or these strategies, but it's not really what is nice for the farmer. So if you look at the pragmatic aspect of it, it has its problems. And so therefore, I don't think I will ever suggest that we take extra measures to preserve these cultural traditions. They're fascinating in their own rights. We need to recognize them, perhaps appreciate them for whatever they are worth. But at a more pragmatic level, perhaps some of these behavioral practices of other than humans may not be allowable in the sense that ultimately it is a human-centric world. And if there is conflict between an elephant and a human, we give priority to the human. Perhaps rightfully so. That's a separate debate. But when that happens, we must also recognize that the lives of other than humans, and that includes their cultural traditions, will be curbed. However much we may find them unique, unusual, perhaps they will never evolve again. They may need to go in an increasingly anthropogenic world.
Humans and macaques have interacted and shared spaces for centuries. As
Yes.
the first poem in this talk illustrated, I think it's a degree on nature of human-macaque interactions that are changing with rapid urbanization.
Right.
There's a question by Shiv Shankar. According to you, what causes macaques to become more aggressive towards humans?
Oh,
That's the second part. Is there any scientific basis to some macaques being more aggressive towards a particular gender, human, than the other?
yeah. So, thank you very much, Shiv Shankar, for that question, for those two questions. First, yes, the basic point is once they lose their fear of humans, and whether that fear is innate or whether it's something that's learned, maybe the different experience of different individuals. But once they've lost their fear of people, they tend to be aggressive, or they could be aggressive. Right. And one of the ways in which they lose their fear of people is by being offered food, because then the drive to acquire that food overcomes their fear, natural fear, and they therefore become aggressive simply because while getting the food, they need to protect themselves. So one of the first things that you do is remove yourself as a source of food for macaques, wherever you are, right? The second set of rules, which I have followed in my study, is you don't look at them in the eye. And I remember events where macaques have charged at me, but by looking away, I have prevented them from attacking me, simply because the moment you look away, uh, the signal that you give the macaque is, I'm not interested in you. And interestingly, I'm sure you know that in the New York subway, when people are traveling on their own and they feel insecure, one of the rules that has been given is that immerse yourself in a book. Don't make eye contact with other people in the subway. And that's exactly what you should do with the macaques. And that's what the macaques do with you. Because when you look at a macaque, the first thing you'll see is that they look away, right? And you should look away as well. And that will prevent you being called a challenger, right? When I've stayed with their macaques, I have sat down with them. I have never stood above them, because when you tower over them, they might consider that of a challenge. And that brings me to your second question, that yes, it has generally been said that women tend to be attacked more by macaques, let's say in pilgrim sites, pilgrimages, or temples, or wherever. And one of the reasons could be the morphological sort of signals that they get, where a human females tend to be shorter, perhaps smaller in build, and pose less of a challenge to the macaques. But it could also be body language, right? So if you find that certain individuals, and they could be men or they could be women, tend to be more afraid of the macaques, and their body language conveys that nervousness or fear, the individual macaques could take that as a challenge, could take that as an opportunity to press forward. And therefore, in general, yes, they are reading our body language, they are reading our gaze. As Michelangelo famously said, the eyes are the mirrors of the soul. And I think they read intention in your eyes. So they read fear, they read nervousness, they read calmness in your eyes. And therefore, I think it's a good idea not to look at them. That I think, and definitely never, ever offer food. Remember, it's a government rule not to feed any wild animal. And we break this with impunity, given our urge to be good to them, maybe satisfy ourselves, maybe feel that we'll have a better rebirth if we feed the macaques in this generation, in this life. Whatever be the motivating factors, I think that leads to changes in macaque-human behaviors, interactions.
The common dilemma says we must develop an ecocentric EVS to reduce conflicts. And we move to the last question by Shweta.
Yeah.
If there's a reversal, what could the difference in success in foraging? What could be the difference in success in foraging?
Right. No, so one of the things, sorry, Anjali,
You can go one after another. She has written a couple of, there are a couple of questions. Yeah.
No, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's all related. So can you please read the full question?
Sure.
Thanks.
Since they depend on food sourced from urban localities, can they adapt to absolutely wild environment? Will they face more or less competition? Will they go back to strategies implemented by the ancestors? Or will they develop new strategies, given that the forests are also harboring invasive species that were probably not present during the times of the ancestors?
Right. And there is, of course, Shweta, as you recognize, there's no one answer to this. And again, I will go back to the individual, to the group. It's very interesting that when we analyze field data, when we look at ecologies, we look at behavioral ecologies, there are a set of biological factors which come from the other than humans that we use. We use a whole range of ecological factors and how those are changing, etc. We look at anthropogenic factors, in particular, presence of humans, human activities, and we try to monitor or model the behavioral responses of these other than human groups or individuals to these set of factors: biological, ecological, anthropogenic. One extremely important set of factors that we completely neglect, and I don't know whether we do this because it's difficult to study them or because we philosophically think that they are not capable of responding to this, and this is experiential factors, experience, right? So if an individual has had an experience of a particular kind the previous day, of course it will influence her behavioral response today, but we tend to completely neglect this. And I think the answer lies in experience, the answer to your questions. So it really depends on these groups or individuals, how dependent they have become on human source foods, what kind of foods have they been used to have during these times, have they also had recourse to more so-called non-human origin natural foods. So, for example, I was given the Bandipur or the Mudumalai Tepakadu macaques, where during the day, when there are no tourists, they're completely in the trees and they're foraging on their so-called natural food sources. But the moment evening, the tourist buses start coming in, the tourist cars come in, all of them come to this central position where everybody's offering food and their entire ecological regime changes, right? Now, if tourists are banned from going to Uti, they will all live and they will all do very well on their natural food resources. Now, whether this is also true for the urban macaques, again, depends on what kind of natural, so-called natural foods they have had experience of during these periods. And therefore, again, yes, some of them may be able to survive under more natural conditions, even if they are, let's say, transported out of a city into a forest. Of course, where they may run into more greater difficulties is not about food, it's about predators. So a urban macaque has never seen a leopard, doesn't know that a leopard can climb tree and take it as food, right? And the first thing that a leopard would do is to prey on a defenseless macaque. So therefore, there may be other sort of factors that may come in that would prevent them from going back to what you call their ancestral condition. On the other hand, certain individuals might still be able to adapt to different extents. Again, the answer is an experience. What have they experienced? How much have they learned these? How much have these become cultural traditions? Do they still retain some of their innate responses? Will a city macaque be a little alarmed if it sees a leopard? Possibly because it reminds her of a feral dog, right? It could even be transfer of stimuli, transfer of experiences that may play a role here.
Thank you so much, Rana, for an amazing talk. It's always wonderful to listen to you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for staying with us, even though we actually pushed past a lot our time. If you have any more questions, please send it to a mail, and I will forward it to Rana. And I'll also make sure Rana hears all the amazing comments.
Yeah. Could you just, so Anjali, could you please copy these comments and
Yes.
send them to me? I've not had a chance to look at any of them yet.
I'll do that, Rana.
Oh, thank you very much.
To everyone, before we go, I also want to remind you, we are also a monthly webinar series, and we will be having, please follow us on our socials to know more information about our next talk. Thanks again for joining us this evening.
And thank you very much, everyone, for being here, for all your kind comments. And thank you, Anjali. Thank you, Samira. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me to give this talk.
Thank you, Rana. Thanks all.
Thanks.
A nice evening.
Thank you.